Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual event space. My name is Allie, and I'll be your host for this evening. And I'm so excited to be introducing Abe Streep and Julian Brave NoiseCat here to discuss Abe's new book, Brothers on Three. But before we get into the good stuff, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in. As much as we miss having you all in the bookstore, it has been such a delight to expand this online program to connect readers and authors in a virtual space. So thank you all so much for tuning in and buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. So I will be linking directly to books in the chat all evening, so it'll be super easy to go find them. For all of you in the Seattle area, come on in. All three of our locations are open, or you can place an order online and come pick them up in store. Or if you're not local, we do ship. And once again, we are so grateful for your support. While you're over on the website, I definitely encourage you to check out some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up in the next few months. And if you'd like to stay in touch with our community, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly update about events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. Speaking of social media, if you'd like to check out some of our past virtual events, you can find all of our virtual events on our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to see any of our other virtual events or share this one, go ahead and track us down over there. So we are going to be here for about an hour, and towards the end, we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or the bottom of your screen. It is different than the chat box, which is great for virtual applause and connecting with each other. We would love to know where you are from or your favorite latest read. But when it comes time for questions, please do make sure that those end up in the Q&A so we can most easily find them. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to our commitment to ensuring the safety and well-being of event attendees and guest authors. So in our chat and question spaces, please do lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. There are auto-generated closed captions available from the menu at the top or bottom of the screen. Select the live transcript button to enable or disable them. Finally, should any technical issues arise, we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. All right, and I believe that that is all of my housekeeping. So without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce Abe Streep, who has written for the New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, Outside, Wired, and so many other places. His writing has been anthologized in Best American Sports Writing and noted by Best American Essays and Best American Science and Nature Writing. He is a recipient of the 2019 American Mosaic Journalism Prize for deep reporting on underrepresented communities. In his debut book of narrative nonfiction, Brothers on Three, he tells the story of the Arlee Warriors who brought the high school basketball state championship title home to the Flathead Indian Reservation in 2017. It is a book about community and boys finding their way through the intersecting worlds they inhabit. And in conversation tonight, I'm so pleased to introduce Julian Brave NoiseCat, a fellow of New America and the Type Media Center, a columnist for Canada's National Observer, and contributing editor with Canadian Geographic. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, among many other publications, and he's appeared as a commentator on many programs, including CBS, MSNBC, PBS, NPR, BBC, and so many others. This year, he was named to the Time 100 Next list of emerging leaders for his journalism and advocacy. He's currently working on a book tentatively titled We Survived the Night about Indigenous peoples in the United States and Canada. So thank you both so much for being here. I am so excited to listen in on this conversation. If you need anything, of course, give me a shout. I will be listening. Same goes for all of you in the audience. I will be in the chat. And with that, I'm gonna pass the stage to our authors. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I also deeply regret not making the bed behind me before I got on this Zoom call for Abe's book talk. Do not take my unmade bed as representative of the work of literature that we're about to discuss, because it's really a fantastic, fantastic book. You know, Abe, I was thinking about where to start, and I think that the most obvious place to start is that this book started actually as a magazine piece, and you've written many, and edited, I should say, many magazine pieces over your career, which means that you had an array of stories before you that could have become books, and yet you decided to turn this one into your first book. And so I wanted to ask why the story of the Arlee Warriors basketball team was one that you wanted to spend more and more time with.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thanks for everyone for being here, and thanks to you, Julian, for spending time with me and with the Arlee Warriors. What happened during the 2017-2018 season when I was reporting on the Arlee Warriors for the New York Times Magazine was truly astonishing. I arrived. I've lived in the American West for a little while and have reported, and I arrived thinking that I might be prepared, and I proposed originally an article about an excellent team, a state championship winning team, and the recruitment prospects of one excellent player, which is a frame that like makes sense to editors, right? And I was not prepared. I was thoroughly unprepared for all that it would be. And I did not know when I started reporting, when I proposed the article, I did not know that the team had won their 2017 state championship in the midst of a suicide cluster that had directly affected the community. And I don't know how anyone could be completely prepared in some manner for that. What over the next many months, as I reported on the team, a lot of it was just a very large and sort of deep experience, and the team they were just stunning. They would before they played, they would say brothers on three, or brothers on three, family on six, because the team was made up of family, and then they would go out and win by 40 or 50 or 60 points. So, and for those of you who don't spend a lot of time around basketball, that's a lot there. This team was stunning, right? And their games were expressions of joy and pride and excellence and sovereignty, I would say, because they played their own distinct style, often misunderstood and mischaracterized style, very complex style of ball, and they would win on their own terms. They never lost. This team didn't lose, and then on top of that, they at a certain point in the season that I was reporting on, they started to speak about issues of mental health and suicide prevention, using videos to do so, and saying we stand with the youth of our community, and starting to normalize a conversation about this. And then on top of that, they won the state championship in this thrilling manner, while 3 of the players were ill, and ill enough to be vomiting during games, like getting IVs before games to be able to play, playing with a kidney stone. The team, I'm a sports nut. I love sports. I love basketball, and I've never seen it. To me, this team embodied all that sports can be. It was the meaning was so much greater than the sport itself. It was like, and it was clear that there was more to say, especially because immediately following the season and following the publication of the article, there's some of the systemic issues of systemic, there's this like long history of a lack of representation of Indigenous young men on college rosters in Montana. And it's a complicated issue in some ways, and in some ways, maybe less complicated in certain instances, but that played out in real time with a couple of the players on the team. And so it was clear that this was after the article was published, and it was clear that there was more to say, and more to say about the history of the place we call Montana and how that affects the lives of young people like these remarkable players and remarkable young men. And I also was not sure that I was the person to do that at that time. You know, I struggled. I thought a lot, grappled with that a lot.
Yeah, I want to ask about that question of authorship next, because you know, this book talk could have began as a little bit of like an Indian and a writer who writes about Indians walk into a book talk, and that's like the beginning of a punchline of a joke or something, right?
Totally.
I'm pretty sure that there's a Vine Deloria passage about something that has a similar kind of gist, maybe not exactly the same. Might be taking a little bit of paraphrasing liberties here, but you know, I think that's a really real question. Obviously, it's a question that I have whenever non-native writers approach native stories. But I came away from the book and also from our prior conversations about your work, you know, feeling like you approached it in a very respectful sort of way, and you know, and with a lot of humility as well. And I wanted to ask you, you know, what was that like, you know, asking to, you know, have that sort of access, the kind of access where you're telling a complicated story, you know, a story where obviously everyone's human, and you put that on the page and you put that in this book, when you are an outsider from this community and an outsider from, you know, a racial group that, you know, played a significant role in putting this community in the position that it's in today.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? I felt, as did other people in the community, that the story should be told in longer form. I wasn't sure that I was the person for that, for the reasons that you've outlined, right? And I consulted with the young men who are at the heart of the book, the young men whose narrative, whose stories drive the book, and their families, and we had conversations about it, and with their encouragement, I moved forward, and ultimately, that was why I decided to move forward. I try to write about this in the author's note. It wasn't a simple decision, and I ultimately just did my best to try to do it with some degree of humility and respect, and to try to not be, as someone very memorably put it to me when I was up there, another one of those, you know. Yeah, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think about that? What is your thoughts on this issue? On should a white man write, can and should a white man write a story like this?
I mean, I came away from the book feeling like you did a really good job with the material. And, you know, in nonfiction and in any form of writing, we have questions of subject and subject matter and subjects and people being represented, which is really, really important in my opinion. We simply don't have enough books about Native subjects of any sort of authorship. And that's one side of the problem. The other side of the problem is, you know, that we don't have enough Native writers and authors getting to write books in general. And I don't mean just books about Indians. Like,
Right.
you know, I would love to read books about spaceships, or any other number of, you know, crazy subjects by Native authors. And, you know, on the one hand, you know, you have, I think, more creative license as someone who is in and of a community to experience and therefore say and write things that I think non-native outsiders might have. But I also think that, you know, the notion that you have to be from somewhere to write about, you know, the people of that place is not one that I necessarily agree with, because, you know, I might be a native writer and reporter, but I go to communities that I am not actually from, that I have no relations who live there all the time. And, you know, that in of itself also raises questions of what it is, you know, acceptable and not acceptable to, you know, work into the pieces that I write when people sort of open up to me. And so, you know, just like any other complex questions around journalism and art, you know, I think it's a challenging space to walk into, an uncomfortable place. But I think also the best writing, the best literature, the best art comes out of that sort of a discomfort and of going into challenging places. And I think you go there in a lot of very real ways with your subjects in this book. You know, I don't want to give too much away for folks who are gonna buy it and read it, but, you know, there are questions of what happens when you write a story that's, you know, front page on the New York Times Magazine, and then that in of itself, you know, is going to change people's lives who you're writing about. And that is something that happened in the course of writing this book for you. And in a way that also implicates you, right, in their lives and in their stories in a very visceral way. And actually, that's kind of the next thing that I wanted to ask you about is, you know, how do you sort of handle that side of the, you know, you're not just a stenographer, you're not just, you know, a person who's just capturing events happening. Through the act of reporting and then telling the story, you then become part of people's lives in a very significant way. This is probably the only New York Times Magazine cover story that any of these people are ever going to be a part of. That's a very unusual thing. And how did you see, you know, that piece impacting the community? And, you know, how did you then sort of think about that in the course of writing the book? To a certain extent, what you said before suggested to me that, you know, the book is almost like a more full narrative and therefore a bit of a corrective to some of the things that maybe couldn't be included in, you know, the 10,000 word magazine piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a large question. You know, journalism doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? As you say, there are, and I'm not going to speak for anybody up there. I'm not going to speak for any of the subjects I wrote about. We have our own relationships, and I will say that I hope that the article certainly had an impact. And there's the moment in the book when immediately after the article is very, very celebratory, right? It's this team that never compromises, and it's also contains this joy and sorrow at once. And this team that has done this astounding thing. And with this astounding player who's been recruited to the University of Montana. And there's long been this frame in the media which is something that a guy named Donnie Wetzel Jr., Blackfeet guy who is the co-founder of the Montana Indian Athletic Hall of Fame, and I talk about a lot, and he's helped me think about, and he's thought about way more than I have. But there's this frame that players, especially basketball players from reservations, need to go out and make it, air quotes, whatever that means, within these university systems that have not been built for them. And And Phillip Malatare, one of the young men who's at the heart of the book, carried that level of expectation. He carried that level of expectation before I arrived. He was aware of it. He once told me, I'm going to have pressure. This was when I was asking him about the book. I was like, is this going to add to the pressure that he carries such pressure? And he said, I'm going to have pressure. But in the article, it's framed that it was at a time when he was going to the University of Montana. After the article published, his family learned, and the school learned, that he didn't have the requisite academic, even though he had very good grades, he didn't have the right core credits to go, because there had been maybe a lack of communication between the two schools. So this article comes out, and there's a moment in the book when Philip's father, John, talks to me about seeing that article. And in the article, he's talking in his own words about this history of, as he sometimes puts it, and I'm paraphrasing here, but like kids becoming stats, like this system that turns kids into stats. And then he's reading this article in which his words are in there, and then he sees something similar happening with his son, and he talks about how difficult that is. And his candor in talking about that was just, in honesty, is just something that I have such immense respect for, and Phil's when we discussed it. So anyway, that's an example of this. The story goes on beyond the article, and part of, I also think that part of what narrative journalism can do when it's done in a complex, reflective, and respectful way is make a human, which isn't to say that I've been able to do this or pull this off, but what you can do is make a human a full, three-dimensional, more, not a stat, a more complicated. We're all complicated. We should get to be complicated. I'm digressing a little bit, but yeah. So the article had an impact, and it also brought visibility to the players and their prevention advocacy efforts. They also were, by that time, were very visible. They had politicians, they were certainly Montana famous and sort of beyond, like there were national politicians honoring them for these videos they had made as well. And so the precise impact of the story, I don't know that I can really say, but yeah.
It's kind of like Schrodinger's cat, but in like, deep colonially rooted social inequities, like the act of measuring and showing a story itself shapes the outcomes to a certain extent of the story, I think. And that's a bit of an inevitable part of, I think, what we do as journalists. We're not novelists. Our stories can be impacted by what we write, and our subjects obviously can be impacted by what we write. And I think that part of the challenge of nonfiction also is that not everybody will be 100% happy with all the things that you write, including the people you write about, and that's an emotionally difficult burden to bear. There's a lot of threads in what you just sort of talked about, and the movie, the videos that Senator Tester and Senator Booker put out were, I think, pretty illustrative at how much of a weird politically charged phenomenon the warrior movement became, and what you wrote about sort of became. But the other side of that is that, I think to tell these kinds of stories, you yourself have to be able to talk about time and place and history, in a different kind of way, in Indigenous contexts, right? This is a people for whom time is not experienced as today or this week, but as, hundreds of years of policy and genocide. And I'm curious how, coming to the Flathead Reservation, you oriented yourself to that part of the material that you were gathering. How did you attempt to corral so much into a story that's really about a kick-ass basketball team?
Right, but that kick-ass basketball team doesn't happen without everything you've just mentioned, right? Yeah, I don't know that I tried to corral it. I tried to just be there in it and try to stick around and stick around and stick around. And I was aware that the history in this book is not in this story is not, it's not a magazine piece where it's like, there's a history section and now there's a capsule history and now we're done with that and you move along. It's everywhere and it continues, as you say, right? There's a moment where one of the young men who's really at the heart of the book, Will Mesteth Jr., and I are, he's watching a softball game in Missoula. And Missoula is the college town, just about 25 miles south of Arlee. Missoula is the word Missoula is a Salish word, and the land is, Will's great grandmother, his Tupia, told him stories about the tribe being forcibly removed from the Bitterroot Valley south of there up to the Flathead Reservation. So, and Will at this point is, going into his senior year of college. He's a state champ. He's like got his sweet sunglasses on, his flat brim cap, and we're watching softball and he's going to go to play a basketball tournament. It's like, oh man, I got to show you this photo, which is really great photo I've got. It's, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but it's back when my tribe was here, and you can see that the hill in the background, and you can see the river, and it's almost exactly the same. And it was just a really profound moment. And there were also a lot of those throughout that the history is everywhere. And I don't know that I managed to convey that, but I tried to be aware of it in writing scenes in the present, that for one, the time I spent there, 4 years reporting, is a hiccup, and that 100 years is the colonial history of Montana is so raw and new and ongoing and unfolding. And basketball becomes an expression, I think, of larger ideas of how to write. This team, when they would, let's bring it back to the kick-ass basketball team, right? When they got in trouble, it was because there was a game where Phillip Malatare scored 48 points and had something like 48 points, 16 rebounds and 9 assists. And he that's awesome. You're like 18-year-olds getting to score 48 points. That's awesome. But then it caused this strife on the team, because that wasn't the point of this team. The point wasn't one player scoring 48 points. Now, after he played that way, he got contacted by multiple college coaches, including at the University of Montana, where he had always aspired to go, because this stat line comes up that might translate in the mind of a college coach to the kind of dominance that he displays on a regularly, even when those stats are not there. But afterward, he sort of recognized, and his coach, Zanin Pitts, recognized that this could cause strife on the team, and he never scored 40 again. And this team, there was a moment in the playoffs where they're sort of in a tight spot, and it looks like they might lose the game. And Phil's just kind of like, they're all talking about defensive rotations or this, getting back in a defense they call 21 or whatever the specific play might be. And Phil just cuts in booming, and he says, we rely on each other. Like, did we leave our heart at home? That's how we beat these teams. We rely on each other. And that's what this team is and was, this historic team. And they, yeah, it's just beautiful.
It's hard not to talk about Phil and the Arlee Warriors without getting into the deep prejudice and discrimination that they faced collectively and also face individually in their own lives. And of course, in the United States, we don't talk about Native people very often, which also means that we don't acknowledge the persistence of anti-Indian racism in our society. There are some very visceral moments of that sort of bias in your book. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit and just illustrate for people the kinds of obstacles and challenges that these characters, Phil, Will, the rest of the Arlee Warriors were facing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we might need more time to get to go to, but I mean, some of it was just, some of the rhetoric, the things that happened were just kind of mind-boggling. During their 2017s, before they were going to their first championship, before I was there, when they won the first of 2 consecutive championships, going into one of the playoff tournaments, there was a radio announcer, a radio host in Billings who suggested that the state segregate its tournaments. It's like openly suggested that, right? During the championship game that year, at the end of the game, with 14 seconds left, with the season on the line, and this, Phil was called a racist slur, right? Coming from the crowd, and he doesn't really react to the crowd. That's not what he does, but it caused a visceral reaction. So those are like maybe the more visible forms. And then there's, and then there are many more, in varying degrees, other forms of what I saw to be forms of discrimination, oppression, traps that have been set out, all these young men's lives, with recruitment, with lack of opportunity in recruitment, but what I thought was really amazing was the way in which they, Will Mesteth Jr., Phillip Malatare, Greg Weitzel, Lane Johnson, all these kids young men, I should say, just kept and keep moving through with just in their own way, and exerting agency and control over their lives, with humor and toughness, and just real toughness and grace, that I found really admirable. What for you? What were were you surprised by any of those forms of discrimination that you saw? And what were, what, you know, there's a, one thing I do want people to think about in the book is that there's the college programs in the state, I think, need to do a better job of recruiting kids from reservations. And at one point and there's a long history in the book of this, and statistics that bear out. At one point, Don Wetzel Sr., who's the former most valuable player of the University of Montana Grizzlies, he's Blackfeet, and he's the founder of the Montana Indian Athletic Hall of Fame, says to me, the coaches in this state have literally forgot about the Montana Indian athlete. And the reporting in the book, at least when I was there, did little to like complicate that idea. And people, you know, this is something that goes back a long time, that was made very visible by the Gary Smith story Shadow of a Nation in 1991. And periodically it has been made visible, but it is like not talked about. And there's a moment when maybe I could just read this real quick, David Weitzel, Greg's father, who is the superintendent during the time I was reporting of Arlee's school, says, quote, "It is hard for Native players to get recruited, and there is not a single coach out there that would tell you," end quote. Zanin backed up that assessment. Bill Drykeson, the coach of Rocky Mountain College, seemed to acknowledge the issue when he said, "You can't lump everybody in there together. We have several kids off reservations playing in our men's and women's programs," end quote. But when I asked Steve Keller, the coach of the University of Providence in Great Falls, a top frontier conference program, about the steeper hill that tribal boys seem to face, his answer did little to diffuse Weitzel's argument. Quote, "I think skill-wise, there's really good players. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just not going to comment on that. Yeah, I don't know you very well, and there's been, yeah, I don't even want to get into that," end quote. Carroll's athletic director, Charles Gross, said it was not his place to tell coaches whom to recruit. When presented with statistics showing a lack of Indigenous representation at colleges, including his, he said, quote, "I'm not sure that's an area I can comment on," end quote. When I asked if any Carroll coaches were tribal members or from reservations, he said, quote, "If I were guessing, I would say no." So there's a reluctance to discuss this large ongoing issue. And I think that, you know, it's something that the players talk about a lot and just should be talked about, just should be talked about openly, and just to start some discourse, because it's like, it's just way overdue. It's, you know, that was something that struck me, because it ends up impacting the lives of the kids, young men who I wrote about. But what for you? Did anything surprise you? And or were you like, yeah, that makes, you know?
A society that abducted us, an alien society that abducted our children into it, and you know, continues to brutalize us, can have a lot of surprises in it still, I guess. I one time was accused of stealing my own automobile. My father and I were accused of stealing our own car because we were Indians in the particular part of North America that we were in. I guess we didn't look like we should have had a car, or had the car that we were driving. So, you know, I mean, on the one hand, all this stuff always is just shocking and frustrating. But also, you know, it's a big feature of society that has, you know, born into this skin and born into this background is one that you just have to contend with. You know, in your book, there's the player who kicks his ass on the court, but then that player gets to go to the University of Montana. And the thing that I guess I kept coming back to when I was reading the book was the way in which the circumstances that these boys have been put into, circumstances that make it harder for them to go off to college for a number of reasons, then become justification for, the bias and the prejudice. Well, we can't recruit those kids because they're not going to be able to make it at college, right? And that in of itself becomes a very vicious, cycle potentially. But what's, I think, sort of the driving tension of the book, right, is yes, you have these traps in the recruiting process in a broader society that are, set for young Native people, for young Native men, for Native people more broadly. And yet you have this team that, just parades across Montana, running up the score against everybody. And so these kids are like the winners, right? These are Indians who are winners. In America, Indians don't get to win very often. And yet they're in this broader, social circumstance where it's really hard to win. And I guess I just wanted to, get your take on that tension, and also, hear a little bit more about where Phil, Will, and the team is now. Did they get consumed by the traps that so many of our people get consumed by, or, do they get to,
Right.
win?
Yeah, well, yeah, this team won on its own terms, and then as you know, like, that didn't always translate to it is right, there is this tension about this stunning, always winning team in a society that just kind of isn't down for that. And I think that, but there's a complication too, that I think that, well, at one point, Franny Brown, the assistant coach in the team, is talking about these kids can go anywhere and they're out of bounds. Like, so when they leave home, they're out of bounds. They're in a places where the traps are more, they're more of the traps, and less understanding. But the book, there is also these people also live in that world. That's where you go to Missoula for life, and it's not so yes, it got difficult, and in different ways for everyone, but I think that, like, one thing I tried to do in the book was sort of interrogate the idea of what winning is, because it's also a book about learning how to lose. You have to learn in like anybody who plays sports, I think, winning is incredible. And then also Franny says to me at a certain point, like, losses, that's how you grow, that's how you become a man, learning how to lose. Which isn't to say, but what I found incredible was, like, that sports was such a huge part of these guys' life, and continues to be. And then they also kind of come to their own realization about, I continued reporting until I saw them come to their own decisions about how to be in the world that were really powerful and empowering, and that was, so I think that winning can take different forms. So let's talk about a couple of the kids, the young men. Will Mesteth Jr., who everyone had always bet against. He was, at the beginning of his high school career, he wasn't eligible to play. He was failing multiple classes. There were many, many cards stacked against him. He became an eligible and then thriving student with the aid of a wonderful teacher named Jennifer Gillett. And then he, at a certain point, said to me, man, I'm not going to be in the NBA. But he had other goals. He was going to graduate from college, he was going to play in college, and he was going to be an example setter, a role model for his siblings. So he recently graduated from United Tribes Technical College in North Dakota, where he played basketball. He got his associate's degree there. He played on the team there, and he got academic all-conference honors while doing so. And his stated goal was to do that and then come home. Arlee is home. He wants to live in Arlee, and as he's framed it, sort of make home better. So I see that as that's what he's done, right? And that's not to say that the challenges of life are not going to be there for him. Of course they will, as they will for everyone in different forms. But he's navigated it with just power. And Phillip Malatare wanted to go, was sort of deemed to be the next, to quote unquote make it. He's a Division I talented basketball player. He didn't get to go to the University of Montana. He went to junior college in Idaho, where he went there thinking that after 2 years there, he would get the chance to come back to the University of Montana, or hoping that. He started for 2 years on a team there that graduated a number of Division I players. He started with guys who went to Florida State, University of Washington, Utah State, and he played great. And then he, at the end of those 2 years, he waited to hear from the University of Montana. That did not happen. He took a year off and worked on the National Bison Range, did good work there, management of which the federal government has, sort of in an overdue manner transferred to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. Phil worked there, and he is now decided to go back and play basketball again. So he is playing in college again with his cousin Tyler Tanner, and they're going to play in a hopefully in a familial atmosphere where I hope that there might be a little less pressure on him, and he can enjoy it, have fun, and also maybe play his game and play the way that he likes to play on his terms. They're going to be at Eastern Oregon University, which is really wonderful. So I see a lot of winning happening there, both literal and or all forms of winning. So yeah, and those are two of the kids. There's Greg Whitesall, there's Lane Johnson, Isaac Fisher. A lot of these guys they're doing good.
Yeah, it's really encouraging to hear. And I was pretty disappointed when I heard that Phil was not, when I got to the part in the book where Phil is not going to get to go to University of Montana because of the clerical error, essentially. But it's very encouraging to know that his hoop dreams get to live on, and that Will is growing into a man with a lot of personal power and a deep commitment to his tribe and his community. That's what we all hope for our young men as Native people, and hope that they do give back to their people and try to lift their people up. And the whole team essentially had the community on their shoulders. Well, you and I had an hour and a half long talk yesterday, and I feel like we could keep going, but these things are time limited because of capitalism and other forces in the world. And we do need to open it up. We need to have some small d democracy in this space. So I think it's time for some Q&A, but of course the book is Brothers on Three. I unfortunately treat all my books like library books and take the jackets off, so you don't get to see the beautiful cover. But Brothers on Three, I really enjoyed it. It's a book about basketball, but so much more than basketball. And it's done with beauty. The writing is really great. The reporting is awesome. And, I think that your voice comes through as very empathetic, Abe, very loving, also very committed to the truth, but also, in a very sort of humble way, which, I think is the right way to come whenever you're addressing or taking part in Indigenous communities or any other community for that matter. So I really appreciate you for your work, really appreciate you for this conversation, and I think it's now time for members of our audience to get to be part of the conversation. So very much looking forward to that. And thanks again to Abe and Third Place Books for allowing me to be part of the conversation. It's always an honor to listen to and think with folks who you really respect and whose work you've seen in other places, and who you aspire to follow into the world of literature. So, Hoops Gem, thank you.
Thank you, Julian. It's been an honor to have you think about and spend time with this. And I can't wait to read your book.
It's going to be a lot.
Well,
Rough ones.
well, thank you both for this wonderful conversation. Let's hop into some audience questions. I'm seeing a few here, but if anyone else has anything that they would like to ask, now is the time. Go ahead and throw those in the Q&A. We would love to hear from you. So this first question is from Ryan, and it says, how did you first approach Arlee and the players when you arrived? And were they receptive to your reporting on the team from the offset? Or was there a moment or moments that you felt like you finally got in their favor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just time and being there, and I don't know, just being myself and just trying to, but there's a moment early in the book when I have arrived and I meet Phil at the store in Arlee, and I know that he likes to go shed antler hunting. I've been told that, and I say sort of very stupidly, like, I'd love to go shed antler hunting with you. He's like, I can't take you shed hunting. Like, and so that was sort of, one kind of introduction, and then it changed over time, and everybody, and also everybody's was different. All the guys were different. There was like, I'm trying to think about specific moments where it felt like something. Oh, there was a moment when it kind of opened. It felt like it opened, but it's a moment that I'm actually going to keep to myself, between me and the team. Something that was said. Yeah.
I love that answer. So we have a question here from Brenda, which says, what, and I think this is for both of you, but what do you think colleges can do to be more welcoming for Native students?
I can answer. I can say what has been said to me about basketball. So I don't want to talk about students, but I don't know, Julian, if you want to address that.
Yeah, I could take a stab at that. I was I had to organize Native students at a college not so long ago, and it was a challenging experience. But you go first. Okay. Well, when
Donnie Wetzel Jr. and I spent a long time talking about this, and something that was very encouraging, I think, is that some of the ideas are not like exactly. They're not. It's on the basketball front. One, hire tribal coaches. There are some great ones out there. Zach Campbell Jr. is from Arlee. He was a coach on the team that Phil played on in North Idaho. He went and did a graduate program at the University of Washington. There's a lot of colleges in Montana, men's basketball programs that could really stand to have him on their staff. Hire tribal coaches. I think that something that Donnie Wetzel talks about a lot is recruiting a couple of kids at once so that there's not as much culture shock. There's a moment in the book where Phil is being recruited heavily by Montana Tech, which is a great school in Butte. And he's being recruited very, very heavily by the coach there. And Phil's mom, Becky, is sitting with the coach at a game, and we're watching it, and she's just talking about Will to the coach. She's just talking about how awesome Will is. And the implication is like not so subtle, but maybe had the coach recruited both of them, maybe they would have gone. And maybe the other kids at that school might have really had other players on that team might have had a richer experience for that, because those teams are kind of teams who don't have these guys, and the next generation of these guys on their teams are missing out. So recruiting multiple kids at once, establishing better lines of communication between academics about academic requirements between these colleges and and schools on reservations. And another thing that Don Wetzel Sr. said to me was, don't make it a one-shot deal. That if give that there's like making an offer. You are welcome to come to this institution from a great literal or metaphorical distance, and having it be an offer that comes once might not be how it's done in the community that the recruit is from. You might need to spend some time there and spend some time getting to know the families, and then if something happens, he was saying don't make a one-shot deal, and that sort of like prefigured what happens with Phil. The academic credits aren't there. Phil is determined to not be another stat, and he goes to North Idaho to try to make it back to Montana, but it was a one-shot deal, and that's a shame because in my opinion, the University of Montana, it would have been just wonderful if they had him on the team for him, for the university, and for the other players on the team. Oh, and the other thing that both Don Wetzel Sr. and Jr. would say is just that the road runs both ways to the reservation. It's we're always talking about the way out, but the road runs both ways, and it's also how great would it be that if like a kid like Will or Phil were be playing in college and then taking kids home to teach them and show them the richness of life and in these places, and that ended up happening with Phil and his college in North Idaho. We ended up doing that. So those are some of the ideas that were conveyed to me.
I think that I'll keep my answer short since it's Abe's book event, but very briefly, I was a student at Columbia University, and we had to fight for a whole heck of a lot when I was a student there. We got, but we fought and won, I should say. We got the first Native student housing that had ever happened on campus while I was there. And we started a campaign that was completed after I graduated to get a plaque on the campus acknowledging that the campus was on the territory of the Lenape people in New York City. And I guess what I would say is that, firstly, I'm very grateful to the school administrators and leadership for, listening to us eventually and allowing us to have space and acknowledgement of our history as part of the institution, a small part of the institution. But the other side of that is that, I think it's just hard to convey fully the emotional and time burden that being a Native person imposes on your life. I recently just cut my hair because a relative in my very large family died, and I had to travel very far to go to the funeral, and I delivered the eulogy and all these sorts of things. And it's been hard to get up and work and do all the things that we're asked to do in a very fast-paced society, and in the same way that everybody else can. And at the same time, there's also the challenges of being a first in a family. There's a challenge of walking into a classroom and maybe never seeing a Native professor. When I was at Columbia, there were no tenured Native faculty. The one Native professor got tenure after I graduated. And I think that it's hard for institutions to be empathetic, to be compassionate to anyone because they're institutions. It's hard for systems to do that. But individual people inside of those institutions and people with good heart and who are willing to listen and to understand across the differences that make society challenging, essentially, can make those kinds of gestures and steps to, you know, make it more possible for native people and students to go to school and to succeed in school. And I think that that's, you know, that's an incredibly important thing. And, you know, every single tribe across North America looks at its graduates as, you know, a sign of hope, a sign of, you know, a brighter future for a people who really in our souls want a brighter future.
So can you hear me? Oh
Yep.
boy. Okay, good. My computer's throwing a minor temper tantrum, but I'm glad you can hear me, if not see me. So we are about at the end of our night. I hate to cut us off because I feel like we could keep going, but alas, time stops for no one. And so I just want to take this last moment to say a huge thank you to both of you for being here and for sharing this story. We so appreciate it. This was such a wonderful event. To all of our audience members, thank you so much for tuning in. We are so happy to have you here. I just want to remind you to go ahead and scroll up through this chat box and go click on that link. Go check out this book. If you want to come pick it up, we of course would love to see you. We of course also do ship. Audience members, let us know what you thought about this event, either in person or online. We always love to hear from you. And with that, I think it's time for awkward waving and saying good night.
Okay.
So one more huge thank you, everyone, and good night. If I can't push end, yep, my buttons are not working. So everyone, I'm gonna invite you to close this on your own. Good night, everyone.
Night. Thank you. Thanks.
Khadihu, as we say in the Shuswap language. Good night.
Night.